The words weren't inked so much as breathed onto the page, an intimate murmur carried across centuries. Dust clung to my fingertips, not like ordinary grime, but like the residue of a life I had never lived. My hands trembled as they brushed the brittle parchment. It was the first line in a book that had no title. I'd found it buried deep inside a forgotten sea chest, shoved into the farthest corner of my great-aunt Mildred's attic. I hadn't returned to her Vermont house out of nostalgia. I came for closure. At 24, armed with a fresh history degree and a barely-paying research job, I had been appointed the family archivist. "Alex, you're good with old things," my mother had said over the phone. "Just go through Mildred's belongings. Keep what matters." So there I was, sweating in the thick, honey-colored light of a late summer afternoon. The attic smelled of cedar wood, old paper, and the fading sweetness of mothballs. Dust motes drifted lazily through beams of sunlight that pieced the grimy windows, illuminating forgotten furniture, leather-bound trunks, and boxes spilling over with the remnants of a long, quiet life. I told myself this was just another cataloging job. Another excavation. But it wasn't. This place held pieces of me, childhood summers, the creak of the third stair, the scent of lavender soap, the taste of wild raspberries growing behind the house. It was personal. The book lay at the very bottom of an oak chest, hidden beneath layers of delicate lace and silk that seemed to sigh into dust at my touch. Its cover was plain black leather, worn smooth with age. No title. No author. Only a single symbol pressed into the surface. A woman. Her form was elongated, almost impossibly graceful. Her hair streamed downward, branching into intricate roots like those of a tree. The design felt ancient, Celtic, perhaps, but not quite. Something older. Something deeply, unmistakably feminine. My curiosity ignited instantly. I sat back on the creaking floorboards, my task forgotten. The brass clasp gave way with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have in the suffocating quiet. The moment my skin touched the first page, something pulsed through me. Not a shock, but a vibration. Deep. Resonant. Like a tuning fork struck against bone. My heart beat, frantic from the heat, slowed abruptly, sinking with a rhythm that wasn't mine. For a dizzying instant, it felt as though the book itself had a pulse, and mine was falling into step with it. Fear stabbed cold and sharp through my chest. I almost slammed it shut. Almost. But curiosity won. There had to be an explanation: chemical residue, psychoactive ink, some strange sensory phenomenon. I needed to understand it. Carefully, I turned the page. The script was elegant, flowing cursive. The ink shifted in the light, from a faded brown to something darker, almost red. "If you've opened this book, are you ready to become who you were meant to be?" It didn't feel like reading. It felt like being addressed. I spent the rest of the day absorbed in it, my research nothing more than an excuse for the pull I couldn't resist. The contents defied classification. Not a diary. Not quite a spellbook. Pages of poetic prose about tides and moonlight, detailed botanical sketches of unfamiliar plants, and cryptic verses that echoed like fragments of forgotten lullabies. The symbol of the woman appeared again and again, sleeping, dancing, weeping rivers from her own hands. That night, I brought the book downstairs and set it beside my bed. I told myself it was nothing. Heat. Dust. An overactive imagination. I was Alex, a rational academic. I dealt in evidence, not whispers from ancient pages. But sleep came tangled and uneasy. I dreamed of the mirror above the dresser. My reflection stood there, but it wasn't quite me. Softer. Subtler. My jaw less defined. My shoulders narrower. Then, slowly, the hair in the reflection lengthened, spilling over those unfamiliar shoulders in dark waves. The face was mine. And yet, it wasn't. A woman stared back at me. Not confused. Not startled. Waiting. Sad in a way that felt bottomless. I woke with a gasp, my name strangled in my throat. The room was dark, lit only by a thin slice of moonlight. The house was silent. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, from the nightstand. The book. Waiting. By morning, the world felt misaligned. Familiar, but subtly wrong, like a radio tune just off frequency. I brushed it off as the remnants of a nightmare. Until I looked in the mirror. My skin was smooth, unnaturally so. Not just freshly shaved, but softer. Finer. I leaned closer, unease tightening in my chest. Humidity, I told myself. Different soap. When my mother called later, her voice crackling through my phone, she hesitated. You sound different. Everything okay? Just a summer cold, I lied. But even to me, my voice sounded lighter. That's when the panic began to take root. Still, I forced myself into the only framework I trusted: observation. Documentation. I retrieved the book and a legal pad. Project: Mildred Anomaly Documentation. Subject: A Thorn. Date: August 22nd. If I treated this like a field study, maybe I wouldn't lose control. My notes were precise, clinical. 8:15 a.m., skin texture unusually soft. 10:30 a.m., slight increase in vocal pitch. 1 p.m., body scent altered, cleaner, unidentifiable. That afternoon, I returned to the attic, searching for answers. Mildred must have known. It was her house. In another trunk, lined with faded floral paper, I found her personal belongings: photographs, letters, fragments of a life. And beneath them, wrapped carefully in tissue, clothing. An ivory silk nightgown, impossibly delicate. Beneath it, a set of lingerie, simple, elegant, preserved like it had been waiting. It was small. Too small. That night, a storm rolled in, rattling the old house. Rain lashed the windows. The power flickered, and died. By candlelight, the world felt unreal. The storm outside echoed the one inside me. Fear warred with something deeper, something insistent. Curiosity. The book sat on the nightstand, silent but heavy with presence. My detachment was slipping. I needed to understand, not just the changes, but the experience. The phrase I'd written earlier echoed back to me. Test tactile and psychological response to foreign material stimuli. A sterile justification. A lie. My hands shook as I reached for the delicate fabric. The candle flame flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. My heart pounded. This was insane. I was a historian. A rational man. So why couldn't I stop? I peeled away the last pieces of familiarity, the humid air clinging to my skin as if even it resisted what I was about to do. The garments I held felt impossibly delicate, cool, soft, precise in a way I wasn't used to. When I put them on, the difference was immediate. Nothing about them was loose or forgettable. They were present. Intentional. Every movement felt newly defined, as if my body had become something I could no longer ignore or take for granted. It wasn't discomfort that unsettled me, it was the opposite. The way everything seemed to settle into place with a quiet, unsettling certainty. By the time I pulled the nightgown over my head, the sensation was almost dreamlike. The fabric draped lightly, shifting with even the smallest motion. I stood there in the flickering candlelight, breathing shallowly, my senses heightened to a point that bordered on overwhelming. This wasn't about anything I could easily explain. It wasn't even about appearance. It was about form. About being shaped into something unfamiliar, and yet, not entirely wrong. Drawn by equal parts dread and curiosity, I moved toward the mirror. The figure staring back at me didn't feel like a stranger in the way I expected. The changes were subtle but undeniable: lines softened, proportions altered, posture shifted without conscious effort. The candlelight blurred the edges further, making the reflection feel like something caught between states. "This is just research," I muttered, though even to my own ears, the words rang hollow. Because beneath the fear, something else had begun to surface. Recognition. It was faint at first, a quiet hum beneath the noise of panic and disbelief, but it grew the longer I stood there. I wasn't recoiling from what I saw. I was drawn to it. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. My notes demanded detachment, observation, control. But when I finally stepped away from the mirror, I didn't rush to undo what I'd done. I didn't want to. The thought crept in slowly, dangerously. What if this isn't a mistake? The days that followed blurred together, each one bringing changes that were harder to dismiss. What had begun as subtle shifts became undeniable transformations. My reflection evolved faster than reason could keep up with, features softening, proportions shifting, something fundamental rewriting itself beneath my skin. I documented everything at first. Timelines, observations, hypotheses. But the more I wrote, the less convincing it all felt. The book offered no explanations, only metaphors. Fragments about rivers finding their course, seeds breaking through stone, inevitabilities disguised as poetry. It wasn't telling me why. It was telling me this was meant to happen. Eventually, practicality forced my hand. My clothes no longer fit the way they used to. What had once been comfortable now felt restrictive, mismatched to a body that was no longer the same. Framing it as necessity helped me act, even if it didn't quiet the unease. The trip to the store was nerve-wracking in a way I couldn't have anticipated. Every step felt exposed, every glance imagined as scrutiny. I kept my head down, moving quickly, telling myself it was temporary, just adaptation, nothing more. But when I tried on the new clothes, something shifted again. They fit. Not just physically, but in a way that settled something deeper. A quiet alignment I hadn't realized was missing. That scared me. Outside, the world began reflecting what I was still trying to deny. A passing comment about my appearance. A longer glance than expected. Small, ordinary interactions that suddenly carried weight. Each one chipped away at the idea that this was something hidden, contained. People weren't seeing who I had been. They were seeing who I was becoming. And part of me, no matter how much I resisted, felt a flicker of something dangerously close to relief. My journal changed after that. The careful distance I had maintained collapsed under the weight of experience. The entries stopped sounding like reports and started sounding like confessions. Even the name at the top of the page began to feel wrong. I hesitated for a long time before writing anything new. Then, slowly, I began again. Not as a historian documenting a phenomenon, but as someone living it. The house itself started to feel different. Smaller. Heavier. Filled with echoes that no longer matched me. Staying there meant clinging to something that was already slipping away. So I left. The decision came faster than I would have ever thought possible. I cut ties, packed what mattered, and stepped into a future I couldn't define. The road stretched out ahead of me, uncertain and wide. And somewhere along the way, a new name surfaced. Not forced. Not chosen with deliberation. Just, there. Alexandra. Each time I said it, it felt less like pretending and more like remembering something I had somehow forgotten. By the time I reached the mountains, I had stopped trying to measure the distance between who I was and who I had become. That question no longer mattered. What mattered was the quiet, growing certainty that this wasn't something being taken from me. It was something unfolding. And for the first time, I wasn't fighting it. I told the landlord my name was Alexandra Thorne, a writer on a quiet research sabbatical. It was the kind of lie that didn't feel like one, closer to the truth than anything I'd said in years. Far from the attic, far from everything I used to be, I settled into a new rhythm. Life became quieter. Simpler. Marked by small, intentional rituals that no longer felt like acts of performance, but expressions of something deeply rooted within me. Mornings began with choosing what to wear, not out of necessity, but with a kind of care I had never known before. Soft fabrics, flowing lines, pieces that felt like extensions of myself rather than disguises. I learned the slow patience of braiding my hair, now long enough to fall in dark waves past my shoulders. What had once been clumsy attempts at presentation became effortless habits, a few practiced motions, a steady hand, a reflection that no longer startled me. These weren't tasks. They were affirmations. The physical changes, once overwhelming, had settled into a quiet permanence. My body no longer felt like something in flux, but something whole, aligned. Even my voice had found its place, no longer shifting or uncertain, but steady and unmistakably mine. But the most profound transformation had nothing to do with what I could see. It was internal. The journal I had once filled with detached observations now felt distant, almost absurd. I tucked it away, replaced by something far more honest, a simple notebook where I no longer documented changes, but felt them. Where I wrote about warmth, loneliness, fleeting joy, and the strange, delicate thrill of being seen. I wasn't studying a phenomenon anymore. I was living a life. The world, in its quiet way, began to reflect that truth back to me. One afternoon, by the river, I was sketching when a young child stumbled nearby. Instinct carried me forward before thought could catch up. I helped her to her feet, brushing away dirt, offering reassurance. "Say thank you to the lady," her mother said gently. The word settled over me like sunlight. There was no jolt. No doubt. Just a deep, steady sense of rightness. As natural as hearing my own name. That evening, sitting alone on the porch, listening to the river slip over stone, I cried, not from fear or confusion, but from relief so vast it felt like something long buried had finally been released. For the first time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't pretending. I simply was. Autumn arrived in slow, brilliant strokes of golden fire, and with it came a quiet certainty. The book, silent now, resting on my desk, seemed to call to me not with urgency, but with inevitability. The place it had hinted at no longer felt like a mystery to solve, but a destination already chosen. Getting there required guidance. The woman I found was called Beatrice, a figure as weathered and enduring as the land itself. She spoke little, but her presence carried a weight that made questions feel unnecessary. When I told her where I needed to go, she studied me for a long moment. That place, she said at last, her voice rough with age, is where people decide who they are. We set out before dawn. The forest grew older as we climbed, quieter, heavier, as though time itself moved differently beneath its canopy. By the time we reached the clearing, I felt it before I saw it. A circle of ancient trees. Roots twisting across the earth like something alive. I knew, without needing to be told, that this was where my journey ended, or began. Beatrice stopped at the edge. "This part is yours," she said softly. So I stepped forward alone. The moment I entered, the world shifted. Sound fell away. Light softened into something almost unreal. At the center stood a single flat stone, waiting. I placed the book upon it. And then, something answered. Not a figure, not a shape, but a presence. Vast. Ancient. A quiet awareness that seemed to exist everywhere at once. A voice followed, not heard, but understood. "You have come far." Two paths unfolded before me, not as images alone, but as lived possibilities. One was familiar. Safe. A return to everything I had known before, unchanged, uninterrupted, untouched by the strange journey that had brought me here. The other was uncertain. Unwritten. A life shaped by truth rather than expectation. There was no real choice. The person I had been no longer felt like me. Not erased. Not denied. Simply, past. "I choose this," I said, not aloud, but with a certainty that left no room for doubt. "I choose myself." The presence seemed to soften, like a breath released after a long silence. And just like that, it was done. The book dissolved into nothing, its purpose fulfilled. The walk back felt lighter. The world seemed sharper, brighter, as though I was seeing it clearly for the first time. Beatrice said nothing, only smiled in a way that suggested she already knew. And she was right. The path down was easier. The rest unfolded not through magic, but through ordinary steps. Paperwork. Signatures. A courtroom. When the judge spoke my name, Alexandra Thorne, it carried a quiet power no ritual could match. It wasn't transformation. It was recognition. I didn't return to my old life. Not because I couldn't, but because I no longer needed to. The future stretched ahead, undefined and open. For the first time, that didn't frighten me. It felt like freedom. Sometimes, on long drives with the windows open and the sun warm against my skin, I think about the person I used to be. Not with regret. With understanding. He wasn't a mistake. He was the beginning. The part that carried me here. The part that made this possible. The road continues. I don't know where it leads. And for once, I don't need to. Because I'm no longer searching for who I am. I already found her.